Activate the Sun Eater array. Full sequence, now!
Sir, it will unmake those systems.
I know!
They say the most dangerous animal is the one cornered. Stripped of their power, their legitimacy exposed as a lie, the remnants of the old Galactic Council decided that if they were going to drown, they would pull the rest of the galaxy down with them. It was their final and greatest mistake. The bridge of the renegade warship Vengeance was a study in controlled chaos. Hidden deep within a nebula that choked sensors, it served as the command center for the last fleet loyal to the old ways. Red alert lights flashed across the metallic surfaces, casting long, dancing shadows. The air was thick with the smell of burnt ozone and stale recycled air. This was not the pristine, confident bridge of a galactic power. It was the last den of a dying beast. At its center stood Admiral Borlath. His once immaculate uniform was stained and creased, his eyes bloodshot from days without sleep. He stared at the main holographic display not like a strategist, but like a deposed king staring at a map of his stolen kingdom. His face was a mask of gaunt fanaticism. He had lost everything, and now he had nothing left to lose. "The Sun Eater array," he commanded, his voice a low, dangerous rasp that cut through the frantic chatter. "Target the star systems of the traitor worlds, Kithra, Viridia, and Serene. Full activation sequence." Now, a stunned silence fell over the bridge. A young navigation officer, Lieutenant Avon, turned from his console, his face pale. "Admiral, the Sun Eaters." "Sir, the archives state they don't just destroy fleets. They trigger a cascading stellar collapse. They create artificial supernovas. We would be unmaking those systems entirely." Borlath's feverish eyes locked onto the young officer. "Precisely, Lieutenant. A lesson in loyalty." He then pointed a trembling finger at another part of the map. "At the same time, I want the 3rd and 5th Squadrons to begin shepherding operations. You will drive the remaining swarm broods directly towards those same systems. Let their new protectors try to stop a plague while their sons are dying. We will give them chaos. We will give them an unsolvable problem." On the tactical map, the crew watched in horror as the simulation played out. A few of their own ships, colored in defiant crimson, began moving like cruel sheepdogs, herding the grotesque biological icons of the swarm towards the bright green dots that represented worlds teeming with innocent life. "If we can't rule this galaxy," Borlath roared, his voice cracking with fury, "then we will leave them an inheritance of ash. Let them see the price of their betrayal." Lieutenant Avon took a hesitant step forward, his voice barely a whisper. "Sir, for the memory of the council we once served, those are civilian worlds. Billions of lives." Borlath spun around, his face contorted in a terrifying snarl. "The council is dead, Lieutenant," he screamed, slamming his fist down on the central console with a loud clang. "Humanity killed it. There are no civilians in total war." With a final decisive movement, he shoved Avon aside and stabbed his own finger onto the master activation panel. A deep, menacing hum resonated through the ship's deck plates as the ancient, forbidden weapons began to draw power from the ship's core. A new icon appeared on the map, 3 red timers, timers, counting down over 3 inhabited star systems. The crew stood frozen, their faces illuminated by the crimson glow of the countdown. Lieutenant Avon stared at the screen, the reflection of the dying world swimming in his wide, horrified eyes. He had followed a leader. He now realized he was serving a monster. While Admiral Borlath played his endgame of fire and death, humanity responded. Not with fire, but with ice. Their counterattack wasn't a military engagement. It was a dissection, performed with the cold, unwavering precision of a master surgeon. It began not with an explosion, but with a whisper in the machine. On the bridge of the destroyer Harbinger, one of the ships in Borlath's renegade fleet, the comms officer frowned. "Sir, we're receiving a priority command from the flagship," he said, confused. "It's ordering us to fire on Sector Gamma 7. But that's our own support wing." Before the captain could respond, the entire network dissolved into chaos. The lights on the bridge flickered once, and every screen flashed with a simple, stark symbol. A perfect white circle on a black field. It was the mark of the humans. The renegade fleet was blind, deaf, and puppeted. Then came the psychological blow. A voice, clear and cold, echoed through every speaker on every ship. It was the voice of Admiral Borlath, taken from a private, encrypted recording just moments before the attack began. "Is my personal shuttle ready for launch?" His voice pleaded, stripped of all its command authority. "I don't care about the fleet's formation. Just get me and my family clear of the blast zone before the Star Killers detonate." A wave of shock and betrayal rippled through the fleet. The crews, who had been prepared to die for their admiral, now heard his treachery with their own ears. Mutinies broke out. Conflicting fake orders sent ships careening into one another. The renegade fleet, once a weapon of spite, began to devour itself from within. While the fleet choked on its own confusion, the second phase of the attack was already underway. Near the massive, charging Sun Eater platforms, new shapes emerged from the void. They were not ships. They were shards of absolute black, silent predators that moved without engine trails or energy signatures. These were the ghost ships, the scalpels of the human fleet. They ignored the dogfights and the chaos, slipping past the panicked outer defenses as if they weren't there. Each ghost ship approached its target, one of the super weapon platforms, and fired a single specialized torpedo. The torpedoes didn't explode. Instead, they unfurled a brilliant net of crackling blue energy that wrapped around the weapon's power core, starving it, suffocating it into silence. Across the renegade fleet, the countdown timers for Galactic Armageddon stopped, one by one, blinking a single damning word: error. On the bridge of the Vengeance, Admiral Borlath was in a full-blown rage, screaming at his helpless officers. "Find the source of that transmission. Get me back in control of my fleet." He never got the chance. The armored doors to his bridge didn't slide open. They were blasted inward, torn from their hinges as if they were made of cheap plastic. For a heartbeat, there was only smoke and the ringing in their ears. Then figures moved through the opening. They were human commandos, clad in the same matte black armor that drank the light, their movements an inhuman blend of grace and speed. They were silent. They were efficient. The bridge crew, Borlath's personal guards, were disarmed and subdued with quick, precise strikes from non-lethal energy weapons before they could even process the intrusion. In a final act of pathetic defiance, Borlath snatched his ceremonial plasma pistol from his hip. Before he could even raise it to aim, a shadow was in front of him. A hand, encased in a black gauntlet, intercepted his wrist. The grip was not flesh and bone, it was forged steel. With a casual, almost contemptuous twist, the human soldier snapped the weapon from the Admiral's grasp. The pistol clattered loudly onto the deck, the only sound in the now silent bridge. Admiral Borlath looked up, trembling, from his captured wrist to the face of the commando. He saw no monstrous visage, no alien snarl. He saw only his own terrified, defeated face reflected in the impassive, emotionless black faceplate. The arrogance, the fury, the fanaticism, it all vanished, replaced by the cold, stark, and absolute realization of his failure. The battle, such as it was, had been over before it ever truly began. Humanity hadn't come to fight a war. They had come to conduct an arrest. There was no grand tribunal hall, no gallery of robed justices, no impassioned lawyers. The stage for the galaxy's final judgment was a single, sterile room bathed in a flat, unforgiving white light. Here, the captured leaders of the council sat on simple, unadorned chairs. Admiral Borlath, the diplomat, Valerius, the syndicate bosses, and the scientists, all of them were stripped of their medals, their fine robes, their symbols of power. They looked like what they were, a collection of old, tired, frightened men and women. Facing them was not a judge, but a single, unblinking camera lens, the impartial eye of history itself. Its signal was broadcast to every corner of the galaxy. On my homeworld, all work stopped. A crowd gathered in the central plaza, our faces upturned towards the massive public screen. 100 different species stood shoulder-to-shoulder scavengers, engineers, farmers, children, all of us bound by a tense, collective silence. We were the jury. The entire galaxy was the jury. Humanity did not speak. They had said all they needed to say. Now they simply showed. The black screen behind the prisoners flickered to life. The first exhibit was presented. It was the grainy, time-worn holographic footage from the Forbidden Archive. We saw the ancient council leaders, their faces calm and resolute, as they voted unanimously to enact the final solution to the human problem. We heard their clinical discussion of genocide as a necessary precaution. Then we saw the horrific results: human monuments, Magnificent works of art and architecture crumbling to dust. Vast digital libraries containing the soul of a culture consumed by data viruses until nothing but static remained. On the live feed, Admiral Borlath scoffed, trying to project an air of disdain. Valerius straightened his simple tunic, a pathetic attempt to retain some dignity. They were watching our crime thousands of years old, an ancient history they felt disconnected from. Then the second exhibit appeared. The footage switched to a crystal-clear audio recording, timestamped from just hours before their capture. Admiral Borlath's own voice, filled with spite and fury, filled the silence. If we can't rule this galaxy, then we will leave them an inheritance of ash. Activate the Sun Eater array. We then heard his direct order to herd the Taryx Swarm into civilian sectors. The ancient crime was a conspiracy. This was a direct, personal command for mass murder. The broadcast was a masterwork of psychological pressure. It relentlessly cut between the damning evidence and the live faces of the accused. We watched as Borlath's defiant sneer faltered. His eyes widened slightly as his own voice condemned him. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a slack-jawed mask of disbelief. He could argue against ancient history, but he couldn't argue against his own words. We watched Valerius, the man of 1,000 silver-tongued excuses, sit frozen. His glib confidence was gone, his mask of civility shattered, revealing the terrified, cornered creature beneath. He simply stared, his mouth slightly agape as the weight of his complicity crushed him. The other leaders broke one by one. Some looked away from the camera, unable to face the gaze of the billions they had betrayed. Others just stared into the middle distance, their minds seemingly broken by the irrefutable truth of their own evil. The evidence stopped. The screen went black again, leaving only the live image of the broken, silent figures in their white room. The silence that followed was louder than any explosion. In that moment, an empire didn't fall to warships or cannons. It drowned in the light of undeniable truth. Into the heavy silence of the white room, the same cold synthetic voice spoke one last time. You may now speak. The camera lens, the unblinking eye of the galaxy, zoomed in slowly on Admiral Borlath. He sat straight-backed, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists on his knees. For a moment, he seemed to struggle, his jaw working silently. Then he found his voice, a low growl fueled by pure, unadulterated hatred. Speak, he spat, leaning forward into the camera. You want me to speak to ghosts? To aberrations? You are the monsters here. You are a plague that should have been cleansed from this galaxy when our ancestors had the chance. His voice rose to a fanatical roar. Yes, I gave the order. I would give it again. A sanitary fire to burn away your shadow. My only regret is that I failed. You have no right to judge us. You have no right to exist. He was still screaming, spittle flying from his lips, when his feed was calmly cut. The camera shifted, moving smoothly to the diplomat, Valerius. He was the opposite of the admiral. He was completely broken. His face was buried in his hands, his slender shoulders shaking with racking sobs. Please, he wept, his words muffled. He looked up, his eyes puffy and red, streams of tears carving paths through the grime on his face. He wasn't speaking to the camera, he was pleading with the universe. It wasn't my fault. I am a diplomat. I follow procedure. The generals, the military made the decisions. I was bound by my duty to the council. He devolved into a pathetic, rambling mess, blaming his superiors, blaming the swarm, blaming a system he had personally profited from for centuries. We can make amends. Reparations. A new treaty. Please, have mercy. His voice trailed off into incoherent sobs. Finally, the camera moved to the last figure, the scientist who had designed the Sun Eater weapons. He was a small, frail-looking man who now seemed ancient. He did not look up. He simply sat with his head bowed, staring at his own hands in his lap as if they were venomous creatures. He saw the lives they had built and the death they had almost unleashed. Do you have anything to say? The synthetic voice prompted after a long silence. The scientist just shook his head slowly, a single minuscule gesture of absolute despair. His silence was a confession more profound than any scream or plea. It was the silence of a man who had looked into the abyss of his own creation and found himself utterly and irredeemably lost. The broadcast ended. The screen went black, plunging the plaza on my homeworld back into the dim orange light of its own sky. For a long time, nobody moved, nobody spoke. We just stood there, 100 different species, united in the silent, awesome gravity of what we had just witnessed. It was in that moment that the old power truly died. Not with the blast of a superweapon or the roar of a conquering fleet, but with the quiet, crushing weight of truth. Humanity didn't need to pass a sentence. They didn't need to be executioners. They had done something far more devastating. They had shown the entire galaxy the true faces of the men who had ruled us, and in doing so, they had given the final judgment over to us. Judgment had been rendered, not with blood, but with clarity. From the ashes of lies, a new order began to form, built not on the shifting sands of power, but on the bedrock of memory. The galaxy, holding its collective breath, watched to see what kind of future the victors would build. The first act of the new era was not an execution. Humanity did not make martyrs of the Council's fallen leaders. They gave them a far crueler sentence: life. I watched the broadcast of a stark, functional transport ship landing on a barren, unnamed planet under the harsh glare of an unforgiving sun. Admiral Borlath, the diplomat Valerius, and the others, now dressed in simple gray jumpsuits, were led out onto the rocky ground. They were left with sustainable shelters, recycled food supplies, and a library containing the complete, uncensored history of their crimes. They were given a lifetime to be spent with no one but each other in the memory of the galaxy they had destroyed. The second act was one of creation. On Coruscant Prime, now a symbol of renewal, a great conference was convened. I was there, a representative for my small, forgotten moon, given a seat at the same table as the great powers. The old partisan leader, his face etched with the wisdom of his long struggle, sat across from me. A representative from Kithra, whose child had been given a ration bar by a human soldier, was there as well. We were a mosaic of the worlds the Council had failed. At the center of the circular chamber sat a single human representative. She did not sit on a throne or at the head of the table. She sat as an equal. Her role, she explained, was not to rule but to guide, to act as a guardian of memory, and to provide the historical context the old Council had worked so hard to erase. The new charter for the Galactic Alliance was drafted not on principles of dominance, but on shared memory, mutual defense, and radical transparency. For the first time in millennia, there was a sense of fragile, cautious hope. And the final act was one of renewal, seen not in the grand halls of power, but in the streets of broken worlds. The public feeds were now filled with images of reconstruction. I saw the shattered spires of Cyrene being rebuilt, with silent human construction drones working effortlessly alongside Zarthani labor crews. I saw human water purifiers cleansing the poisoned rivers of Viridia. But the image that remains with me most clearly, the one that truly defined the beginning of this new age, was from a small park on Kithra. Alien children of a dozen different species were playing a simple chasing game amongst the newly planted trees. Then, from a nearby residential block, another child ran out to join them. This child was human, small, laughing, and for the first time any of us had ever seen, not wearing a uniform or combat armor. Just a child playing with other children, under a sun that was safe once more. The first formal session of the new Galactic Alliance was filled with a sense of purpose and cautious optimism. For the first time in my life, I felt I was part of something being built, not something decaying. We debated the charter, established new trade routes based on fairness, and planned for a future of mutual cooperation. It felt like a new dawn. Towards the end of the session, the old partisan leader, his voice resonating with quiet dignity, stood to address the assembly. To truly close the book on the past and build our new future on a foundation of complete truth, he said, his gaze sweeping across the chamber, there is one last mystery that remains. The origin of the Taryx Swarm. For the sake of our historical record, we should formally classify it as a hostile, non-sentient cosmic phenomenon, a random tragedy that befell us. A murmur of agreement went through the hall. It seemed a fitting, final piece of galactic housekeeping. All eyes turned to the human representative, expecting a simple nod of assent. She sat in silence for a long moment, her expression unreadable. She looked down at the council table, her fingers steepled before her. When she finally looked up, her eyes were filled not with triumph, but with a profound, weary sadness. No, she said softly, her voice carrying to every corner of the silent chamber. It was not random. She gestured toward the central holographic display. A single heavily encrypted file appeared, brought forth from the deepest, darkest, most secret layer of the old Council's archives. The file name was Stark, Project Taryx. Status: uncontained failure. To ensure humanity's complete eradication, the human representative stated, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. The old Council did not trust war alone. They commissioned a final solution. The file opened. It wasn't a grainy recording, it was cold, hard, technical data. Schematics of bioengineered monstrosities. Genetic charts. Lab reports detailing horrifying experiments. The objective, written in the clear, calm language of a scientific proposal, appeared for all to see. To create a self-replicating biological weapon capable of hunting and exterminating a target species across any environment. Then, the targeting mechanism was displayed. The weapon will be keyed to a unique protein sequence found only in the Homo sapiens genome. The chamber was utterly still. The air grew thick and cold. We were looking at the schematics for a weapon designed specifically to hunt and kill humans. The final entry was a series of panicked log reports from a secret research facility in the uncharted territories. It detailed the weapon's unexpected mutation, how it had developed a hive mind far beyond the creator's control, and how it had broken containment. The final log entry was just a scream. The Taryx Swarm hadn't just been a plague, it had been a weapon. A weapon that had missed its intended target and, in its blind hunger, had turned on the entire galaxy. It had turned on its own creators. A wave of collective silent horror washed over the assembly. The old partisan leader's face seemed to crumble, the hope of moments before turning to ash. The Kithran representative looked physically ill. Any last, lingering shred of sympathy for the old Council, any thought that they were merely weak or incompetent, was incinerated in that moment. They were not just failures. They were monsters who had unleashed a plague upon the galaxy in their cowardly attempt to murder a rival. The monster we had all feared most, the mindless horror that had consumed worlds, was a product of the very people who had claimed to be our protectors. The ironic, tragic loop of history had finally closed. Many years have passed since that final terrible revelation. The galaxy did not descend into chaos. Instead, it began to heal. The alliance, built on the hard-won foundation of truth, has held. I am no longer the scavenging child of a forgotten moon, nor am I merely a delegate. I am now a keeper of this place, the Great Hall of Memory, one of its historians. It is a quiet, sunlit space at the very heart of Coruscant Prime, where beings of all species come not just to see artifacts, but to understand. They come to remember. At the very center of the hall, floating in a gentle anti-gravity field inside a case of pure crystal, is the object that started it all. My old mysterious toy, the black box. A single beam of soft light illuminates it, catching the flawless, midnight dark surface. It looks no different than it did all those years ago in the dust and ruin of my homeworld. I often find myself standing here, just as I am now. I approach the crystal case and place my hand against its cool, smooth surface. The gesture is an echo of a lifetime ago, a mirror image of the child's touch that awakened a sleeping giant. In the reflection on the crystal, I see myself. The face is older now, lined with age and the weight of the stories I keep. My scavenger's rags have been replaced by the simple robes of a scholar. It is a peaceful face, a tired one. Then another figure appears in the reflection behind me. She is tall, and she moves with a quiet that cannot be taught. She wears the simple, dark blue formal uniform of the human high command. It is the woman who led their return, the Grand Admiral herself. Her face, which I have only ever seen on screens, is just as I imagined, strong, intelligent, and etched with a subtle, permanent sorrow. She too has come here to remember. She says nothing. I say nothing. Our eyes meet in the reflection on the crystal case. We hold each other's gaze for a long moment, and in that shared look, everything is understood. The terrible cost, the heavy burden of leadership, the shared duty to never let the galaxy forget. Slowly, respectfully, she gives me a single small nod. I return it. No words could ever carry the weight of that silent exchange. I turn my gaze back to the object floating within the case. The box is no longer a mysterious toy to me. It is no longer a key that unlocked a galactic war. It is a reminder, a permanent, violent reminder that justice is not mercy. And that memory can never, ever be truly erased. The story of the judgment is over. A hard-won peace has settled over the stars. a peace built on the painful but necessary foundation of truth. But the journey of the forgotten is not yet complete. They have reclaimed their place among the stars, but they have not yet found their home. I stand now on the high observation deck of the Great Hall, looking out at a vast three-dimensional map of the galaxy that swirls silently in the center of the room. It is a living map, constantly updated, and it is running the single greatest project the New Alliance has ever undertaken. Sectors of space containing billions of stars are highlighted, scanned with unimaginable detail, and then dismissed one by one in a slow, patient, galaxy-spanning search. A new whisper has begun to circulate through the star lanes. It is not a whisper of vengeance, but one of hope. The search for a legendary homeworld, the cradle of it all, a place called Earth, has officially begun.